Welcome, Yamhill County, to Speaking Frankly. I'm your host, Howie Harkema, and our tagline is, "And how we doing?" Well, we're doing great tonight. We're sitting outside in the nice warm air in my backyard, and there's Beth Wytoski, our possible next um, uh, county commissioner. Yes, so many different people I've interviewed lately that I get confused. Hi, Beth.
Hi there.
Hi there. Oh boy. So you've been a busy, busy woman.
Oh gosh, I have been so busy lately. Yes.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions. First, what have you learned on the campaign trail over the last few months?
Oh gosh, this has been a huge learning experience for me. I've learned a lot about areas of the county that I didn't know as much about before, and I'll get back to that in a minute. But I have also learned so much just technical information about how to run a campaign. I don't have a campaign manager, so I'm running this show. My husband is my treasurer and is doing all of my campaign finance activity. Uh, we don't have any paid staff. I feel like it's like me and him, and just trying to build like the most grassroots movement we can. And so we're really working on lots of house parties, lots and lots of house parties of going into someone's home and learning about them and their priorities. And then a lot of the time, maybe 8 to 20 people might join you to have those discussions. That is something that's been brand new to me, even in 14 years of political life. Just all of these small gatherings and these really intimate, deep conversations. I have learned so much about the county and about where people are on lots of issues. It's made me a much better informed candidate. And I really feel like, as a long-term city councilor and mayor who's been involved in several statewide coalitions and county leadership, um, I really believe I've been a very informed public official and a very informed citizen, but I am so much more informed having been on the campaign trail. And then, some of the technical things, all of the all of the specifics of sign sizes and all of these variances between communities, when you can put up signs, and that there's a different sign. You can't put up this size in McMinnville, but you can put up that size out in Sheridan, and just all of the differences. And we've learned it all ourselves, and we're doing our very, very best to make sure that things are compliant. It's really important to me, again, especially as a mayor councilor, that we respect each city's decision, because there was probably a reason that they
Sure.
wanted to, yeah, to limit those timelines or those sign sizes. And so trying to respect the process that another council has gone through has been a big learning thing. All of the campaign finance stuff has been huge learning. I there's a good chance that we are like over reporting, because if somebody helps me out, and somebody gave me a pack of zip ties, and I was like, thank you for this in-kind donation of $12. Because I've been a rule maker for a long time, and I am a rule follower. And so it's, that level of transparency is really important to me. But I'll tell you, my poor husband, processing all of those things has been huge. And it's been a weight. He works full time,
Yeah.
as do I. So we both go to work. We're gone all day and doing our jobs. And then we come home, and he is running our kids. We have a volleyball player, a dancer, a preschooler who have to get to all of their things, while I go to City Hall and do mayor things. And then a lot of evenings we have a house party or a stump speech somewhere, some sort of event. And then we come home and have dinner at 9 o'clock, and then process campaign activity until sometimes 1. And even following my kickoff party, oh my gosh, there were like 362 transactions or something. It took days, multiple days of these late nights to process every in-kind donation, every help, every purchase, every ticket, every donation. But But what a beautiful thing, because another thing that I've learned um, is how incredibly supportive the county and the communities are. I have been blown away by the generosity of people who I know have struggled to make ends meet, and they're coming up with $100 for the campaign.
Sure.
Or, you know, my parents' friends who are maybe on fixed incomes and they're coming up with money to support the campaign. Um, you know, people who I didn't meet until March are willing to hit the streets and place door hangers and have tough conversations and tell their neighbors with a sign or verbally, you know, that they support me. And man, that's been a beautiful thing to learn. One more thing I'll talk about, a little bit of something I've learned. Oh gosh. And it is that people are really ready for some healing.
Yes.
The divisive political nature of the last several years, combined with COVID related trauma or loss, you know, combined with really polarized rhetoric, man, it's hurting people.
Yeah.
It's hurting people personally. It's hurting our political communities. It's really discouraging participation in the process.
Yes.
Inherently then, you know, makes our elections less reflective of the community interest. It's just it's so hard. And over, especially with canvassing, lots of conversations reveal this, but especially with canvassing, when I'm out and I'm knocking on doors and I speak with people, one of the number one things when I ask them, you know, what's your priority? What are you concerned about with Yamhill County? One of the number one things, probably the most common thing I hear, is that divisiveness, and how people really, really want to find common ground and move forward in a positive direction where there are no longer my team and their team and good guys and bad guys, but where we're just a community again.
Right. Healing. Yes.
That's the healing. Yep.
Yes. So, you talked about intimate little parties that you had to done in houses and such. Is it harder to speak to a large crowd, or is it harder to speak to a small crowd?
You know, I don't know that I don't excuse me. I don't know that I would say either one is harder than the other. They're just different.
Right.
You know, I mean, the challenge of the small crowd is, I think you can get into some really deep questions. Folks might want some really specific answers, and so that can be challenging in itself. I feel really fortunate because I do feel very adequately prepared for the position. And so
Right.
I have well-developed plans. And so when folks ask, well, how are you going to do that? I typically have an outline for my approach. But it is hard because sometimes I might go into a setting where I think, you know, this gathering, this friend invited several business owners and I'm expecting to talk about economic development.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go in and they really want to talk about preserving natural resources. And in, you know, in that small setting, I am not the driver. The people who have come to have a conversation and to ask questions, they get to drive that conversation. And so I think, you know, I have to release that and say, okay, this is what they're here to talk about, and that's what we're going to talk about. And so I think probably one of the harder things is sometimes I have to shift gears really quickly and go, okay, well, you know, I expected this direction. We're going to go this other way. And you got to be ready for those left turns. So that's probably a challenge with those small parties. In a larger setting, in a crowd, especially if it's an event that I'm involved in the planning or hosting of, you know, I kind of get to set the agenda. I can pick the topics. I can really focus on some things I'm really passionate about, which, you know, not everybody wants to talk about infrastructure as much as I want to talk about infrastructure. And I recognize that after almost a decade as a mayor. Oh my gosh, my husband would tell you, you know, he goes to dinner when we have mayors conferences and he's going to go to dinner with us and there's 7 or 8 mayors at the table, and as soon as the first one says the word sewer, he's like, that's it, it's over.
Yeah.
Because there will be no other content discussed for the remainder of the evening. We are only going to talk sewer. We're going to talk laterals. We're going to talk lagoons and and treatment. And that's part of why I love those, right? Those are my people. That's my tribe, the people who want to talk about all the infrastructure. And so in a large setting, I get to talk about that a little bit. I can say, let's talk about the roads and let's talk about the bridges and the buildings. And I really want to talk about parks. And I guess, so the challenge of the larger setting is reaching everybody with what they need, what they're there for, because in the small setting, they can just say, I understand you have this plan for economic development.
It's okay.
I understand you have this plan, but I really need to talk about, this other thing that's impacting me. It's right down the road. And in a larger setting, they don't have the opportunity to drive the conversation. And so the challenge is, how do I engage with everybody in the room, and make sure that they get some takeaways, some good information that they came for, when they don't have the opportunity to ask those individual questions. So I actually really enjoy both settings. They're all learning experiences for me. I hope they're also learning experiences for folks having those conversations. But I don't know. I don't know which one I would really say is harder.
Well, they're different.
They're just different. Yep.
So, what are some of the important questions that the Yamhill County citizens have asked you up till now?
Yeah, so I've had a lot of questions about supporting business growth. I've had a lot of questions, to be completely candid, I've had a lot of questions about strategy in terms of how to work with the current direction of the board, and how to find common ground. And so I've had that conversation a lot, about trying to refocus the conversation on issues where we have common ground, and to refocus the county on, the most immediate, like in the internal business, on the infrastructure and the public safety and the services.
Right.
But that's probably the number one question I get, is, what's your plan for pursuing any of these interests that you have if they're not currently being discussed?
Sure.
Some other questions that have come up a lot have been, about my own, like my balance of, how are you gonna take this job on when you have all these other things? And I mean, I can actually address that here, but my plan, if elected, is that I will actually be giving up my career. So after, I've got my master's degree in education and I've been in education for a long time, but I will leave the classroom, and focus on this full time. I really think that the position deserves and requires my full time attention. Even with even with the current meeting schedule, the meeting schedule isn't particularly demanding, but I really want to fill the rest of my days and hours, meeting with stakeholders, meeting with partners, having discussions, being a convener, so that we can figure out some really great plans and strategies for moving the county forward. And so yeah, my answer to that sometimes gets me a little bit emotional, because I've loved being a teacher so much, and I'm very invested in student success, and so the idea of stepping away from my classroom is hard. It's about as hard as the idea of stepping away from my city leadership role, which I've just loved, because I lead with my heart, and I deeply love my community. And yeah, so that question has been common, and I usually cry when I answer it. Because it's just going to be a huge change in my life, and I'm going to be giving up some things I care very deeply about to pursue something else, that I also care very deeply about.
Well, you can help a lot of constituents by what you're attempting to do here. So remember that always in the background. So what do you think some of the differences are between you and Kit Johnstone?
Um, so the funny thing, I think some of the similarities are actually kind of funny. We went to the same high school and grew up in the same community. So we have mutual friends. We both come from nursery families, so both of our families do business with the same people. So we kind of have a lot of coincidental overlap. I think some of the differences. I think the biggest difference is experience.
Right.
I know that the last couple of years, Kit has done some work with Planning Commission and some other small special districts. I have done work basically my entire adult life, starting from being a college student and working on public safety campaigns, to the session I spent in the legislature. Um, and then as soon as I came home, I usually say came home, when I moved back to Dayton to start my adult life, I immediately ran for a city council seat and have stayed on that council ever since. So for 14 years, I've worked on infrastructure and changing communication and adding events and economic development. And I think my experience, not just in the political arena, but specifically in nonpartisan delivery of services, really does set me apart. I have worked on infrastructure projects that total at this point in the tens of millions.
Sure.
Um, I've participated in programs that brought in similar numbers that were in grants. One of the things that I really want to see Yamhill County incorporate is a hotel tax or a transient lodging tax, and that's something that I've already done for the city of Dayton. Developed programming, looked at the spending restrictions. I know the statutes. We have had a successful program that just transferred $136,000 into our parks,
Right.
after never having a parks revenue source. So I think experience is probably the biggest thing that sets us apart.
Yeah, McMinnville set up their TLT too as well. And so, yeah,
Yeah, several cities have, and I think it's really interesting to me that the county hasn't. And I know that generally people are not excited about new taxes, but the TLT works very differently than pretty much any other tax you could
right,
propose, because it's not paid by our residents here. But I'll tell you one thing that I get a little defensive about is we're paying it. We're all paying it, but we're paying it when we're somewhere else. So when Yamhill County residents go to the coast, we're
right.
paying the TLT. When we go, down to Eugene for a football game, we're paying the TLT. If you fly down to Vegas, you're paying the TLT. That's why Vegas has an incredible an incredible parks program,
Sure.
is because those TLT dollars fund their parks.
Right,
And so our residents are paying it when we travel, but then we are essentially also having to pay it when we're at home, because the folks who travel to us aren't.
exactly.
And so while the tourists are here to enjoy our facilities, they're driving on our roads and they're visiting our parks, and um they are creating a burden on our traffic systems and several other components, and they are not contributing to those solutions, which means we have to foot their bill. So I mean, the biggest reason I want to see that tax incorporated is because the way I view it, I mean, right now we are paying it.
Right.
Um,
That's exactly true, Beth.
and we're paying it at home and we're paying it when we travel.
Right.
And that's not acceptable to me.
Yeah. We're going to go into some of your platform here.
Okay.
Let's talk about affordable housing and low cost housing and homelessness. And I know you sit on a number of panels and boards discussing this topic. So,
Yeah, actually earlier this afternoon, we had our statewide task force on homelessness meeting. And it's been a rough task force to sit on. It is occupied with 25 mayors from all around the state, with the intention that we would have mayors from the east side of the Cascades, the south, the valley, the metro area, and the coast, that we would have small cities and large cities, that we would have, every aspect of diversity represented, so that whatever comes out of that task force, we can say, this is a statewide approach that we are asking for with a unified voice. And I have been unsure that we would get to say that sentence.
Right.
Because we have big cities that are at an emergency room point where they have so many folks at an extreme crisis that their needs look really different than they look somewhere else. And then we have very rural folks who don't have any visible homeless, but who are really looking to fund some prevention services.
Sure.
And things like sometimes it's physical things, like they want to subsidize systems development charges, or assess soils that are shovel ready to lower the cost of development to improve the housing index. And sometimes it's for mitigation, and it's going to be things like disposing of trash or abandoned vehicles, and small cities need help with those things. And today, I'm really pleased, and I can't talk about the details because they're not public yet, but today we came to an agreement about how much investment we as a group will be asking of the legislature, and also some details about what we view as the most effective application, because we have this intense governor's race, and I'm not sure any of the three candidates actually has a housing and homelessness solution. And part of that, I think, is the disconnect, because the high visibility and the burdens of when there's a lack of funding or lack of services is really falling to the cities. Right. And yet the authority to address these issues and the funding to address these issues hasn't come to cities, and it's been insufficient in counties. And so today we finally got to this point where we have a plan, and now we're going to say, candidates for governor, none of you has this detailed plan. We do. Does somebody want to help push this?
Yes.
But I really view, Yamhill County, I think, needs to take a similar approach to our statewide look. And that is trying to figure out how to fund those emergency situations, people who are at a crisis, who need, a temporary low barrier shelter.
Right.
Also creating some of the long-term supported housing, which we fortunately have some, but there's some other models that are working more effectively in other counties. And I think Yamhill County can use some of those. There are veterans villages that are a great model, and we see those in like Union and Malheur County, where they have an excellent, effective model where there's actually parcel ownership. And so the veteran that's occupying these homes, this is their home, right. It's their space, but they're also jointly owned with OHA. And so they're very high barrier shelters, but they do keep people off of the streets and make sure that they are supported, and that there are wraparound services available to protect them.
And they're case managed, and even when they transition out of temporary housing, the case manager probably will look into how they're doing for quite some time.
Absolutely. And so, I really think the wraparound services are the key. Shelter alone is that emergency approach only. You can have the most amazing emergency room in the world. You can treat everything. You can stop the bleed and you can prevent the death. But if you don't address the hospital side, you're going to have the same number of people end up in the emergency room each day. And that's why I feel like we really have to divide our focus between that emergency crisis sheltering and then also these preventative services. So for the affordable housing part, I view that as, we've got a few opportunities where we could lobby for things like expansion of Senate Bill 8, where we can use commercial or otherwise zoned lands and build some higher density housing in order to create some affordable models.
Right.
We can also use some public funds in order to identify shovel-ready lands, which reduces the cost of development.
Right.
That can encourage the timeline for development and reduce the purchase cost at the end. We can also look at things like flexible payments of those SDC fees or permit fees, like where the developer doesn't pay those until there's a point of sale, so that they're not out all these upfront costs, which can be prohibitive for development.
Right.
And so there's a handful of those flexible regulatory approaches that I think we can take to encourage development, to increase the housing supply, while we're also looking at what do we do for these emergency situations.
Yes, and Encompass Yamhill Valley deals with both the emergency situations and the other more permanent or at least semi-temporary. But at the same time, it's never going to be enough. It's going to take all of the nonprofits working in concert together with the state, the counties, the cities to make it all happen. And it needs to work that way.
And that's part of the underlying direction with the statewide task force. Is that if we have all these points of contact involved in this, scattered about the state, and checking with agencies and determining distribution of funds and creating some accountability for some programs, we're going to have a lot more coordination to make sure that we're not doubling up on the wrong areas and skipping other areas entirely.
Yeah. We've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you a couple last questions here.
Okay.
Where can citizens get a copy of your yard signs?
So we have a free little library right in front of my home. And I live in Dayton. I live at 818 Howard Jordan Loop. And there are always, occasionally it runs out and we try to restock it right away, but there's always a little stash of yard signs right next to our free library at the reading bench in front of my home.
Okay.
There are also homeowners that live in Newburgh, Yamhill, and McMinnville that have a stash of signs each. And so if folks want to reach out, send an email, I can direct you to those individuals. Where signs can also be picked up. And I also do lots and lots and lots of personal deliveries, which I love because then I have another opportunity to have conversation.
Yes, it's that wonderful opportunity. I know you had a candidates forum last night at the senior center that NAMI sponsored.
We did.
But do you have any meet and greets, debates, forums, house things that you're doing in the next few weeks?
Well, the two I think that I'll mention for immediate is that tomorrow we have the Chehalem Chamber of Commerce Forum. It's tomorrow. It's earlier in the day. I believe commissioner candidates are going to be speaking. It's roughly 11 to noon in Newburgh. And then next week on Wednesday, we have the McMinnville Chamber Forum, which will be at Oregon Mutual Insurance in McMinnville.
Right.
That one is another evening forum. And so those two are both great opportunities to get some exposure to the candidates, and to get some comparison time, and to hear where we sit on the issues.
So if people want to get to your website, what is your website?
My website is bethwytoski.com.
And then you also have a Facebook page.
I do, Beth Wytoski for Yamhill County.
Very good. So I have one short last question. What can Yamhill County community do to assist you in your efforts? And do you still need volunteers?
We always still need volunteers, right? Certainly if folks are willing to knock on doors and help carry messaging and have conversations, that's one thing that people can volunteer to help with. Another is even if you don't include me, having your own house parties, inviting your neighbors and having a conversation about who you support and why, and your experience with that candidate. Those conversations are that's how you change hearts and minds. It's personal conversations is much more effective than anything else a campaign is going to run. Additionally, if you have had a positive experience, sharing that publicly, letters to the editor can be really powerful. And I invite people to write letters. And finally, making a campaign donation is always going to be helpful. Ads are expensive, and so are the materials required to run this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having a second interview with me on Speaking Frankly, and we wish you the very, very best of luck. We hope that you win this Board of Commissioners seat and that things can change at least a little bit in Yamhill County. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Howie.